Hey, Grampian Nation. Hey, welcome back. You're in for a treat. Today, we're going to talk to a Navy SEAL, a combat veteran, a CEO, none other than Marty Strong. Hang on, we're going for a ride.
In 2013, I coined the name Grampian, and I gave it to your host, Jim Tracy.
Marty, welcome to Grampian Nation. Man, you are the author of 9 books, 3 business books. You're a corporate board member. You've lived a pretty stinking big life, dude. We're going to talk about it, but welcome to the Grampian.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jim.
Oh, we're just thrilled to have you on, man. As I told you when we were talking before, it's like your odds of meeting a Navy SEAL are like 1 in 2 million people, and like you guys are rock stars, and we're going to talk about that some. But I also wanted to kind of dive in a little bit to what built Marty, and so tell us a bit about your childhood. We had some like things in common in the Midwest.
Yeah, so I was born in Sidney, Nebraska, out in the Panhandle, of Nebraska. I was supposed to be born in El Paso. I was 2 weeks late, so I just missed being, able to qualify as a Texas Ranger. I've been pissed about that for a long time. Um, and there are no benefits associated with Sidney, Nebraska, so you just that's it.
Yeah, the
Um,
Sandhills, maybe.
yeah. Family moved when I was about 4 years old to Omaha, Nebraska. I was out on
Military
the
kid?
western. Huh? What's that?
Military? Was that a military
Oh, my
kid?
dad, at that point, he wasn't in the military. He worked for the Department of the Army, the
Okay.
Corps of Engineers, and he took a job in Omaha, and we were on the western edge of Omaha, which at that time, at the top of our street, you looked at cornfields all the way to like Wyoming and Colorado. There was nothing out there.
Yeah.
Now, that's familiar with the Omaha area, it's a big metroplex, and there are like 10, 12 miles of city beyond where I live.
Right.
But back then, it was a great place to grow up because hunting and fishing and exploring and building forts and building ice forts in the winter and lots and lots of outside gangs of guys just having fun
Yeah.
and turning anything into a toy, a weapon, whatever, because nobody had a lot of money. So flip a baseball bat around, it's a gun, it's a rifle. Flip it the other way around, it's a bazooka. That kind of stuff.
And a rock is a grenade.
Yeah, absolutely. And dirt clod fights are legitimate combat training. So
There you go.
the and everybody was pretty much raised by the same kind of depression era hardworking people. Doesn't matter if you were white collar, blue collar. Everybody was very frugal and very believed in the golden rule and a lot of the other rules of life. Like if you borrow
Yeah.
something, return it in better
Yeah.
shape than when
Better
you
shape than you
borrowed it.
found
That
it.
kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that had a lot to do with my work ethic and my, I guess if you want to call it hardy or sturdy kind of disposition going into the Navy. 125 pounds. I went in when I was 17, and I looked like I was about 11 years old. So I followed my father's footsteps. He was a radarman in the Korean War. Went in to be an operations specialist, which is kind of air traffic control and radar mixed in. Did that for 17 weeks. And when I got my orders, they instead of going to the ship that thought I was going to, the orders read Underwater Demolition SEAL Team, Coronado, California.
So
So
did you
those I've ever
ask to
heard.
go to Buds? Or
No,
did they just say you're
no,
going?
no. And it took me 8 years to figure out what happened because 8 years later, I was at SEAL Team 2 for 8 years. 8 years later, I ended up as the chief in charge of the first phase of training where Hell Week and everything is. And I was able to go into the archives and look at my record. And there was a screening test, a SEAL screening test sheet in there from when I was in boot camp. And I put two and two together. I was there to swim because I was going to be in a swim competition for boot camp, and the pool was occupied with 75 guys doing whatever. It turned out it was a SEAL test, and the guy in charge of my boot camp company said, "Well, you do whatever that guy says." He said, "I can insert you, but I can't disrupt everything." And he watched me swim, and I did the rest of it. I did the pull-ups and push-ups and all that, and then I ended up
Yeah.
doing this run in the middle of the night. Went back to my boot camp company, didn't think anything of it, but they took my social security number down, and I was like 75 guys in there. I think there was like 6 of us that filled out the paperwork and walked out. And next thing you know, I'm out of butts. I don't know what the acronym stands for. I don't know what a SEAL is. Back then, it was heavily classified. There was no recruiting program for them. And my dad said, "Go
Providence.
find a chief petty officer, and he'll work it out, and you'll get these things squared away." And I ended up finding a master chief, heavily decorated, multi-tour Vietnam veteran, and he talked me into volunteering.
Oh, wow.
So that's how that all started.
Wow. And I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but give us the sentence or the clip or the thumbnail of what Buds was for you.
It was very interesting because I truly didn't understand what SEALs were, and it wasn't like I had some shining vision of the future. There was no light at the end of my tunnel. It was just I was surrounded with guys that did know something about it, and I think it was a matter of pride, and then eventually just being obstinate. I didn't want to be called a quitter
Yeah.
because it was clear that the instructors made the idea of quitting a real bad character trait. And my dad wouldn't let me quit anything I started, whether it was a project or a sports team, whatever. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to just keep putting one foot in front of the other until I pass out and they carry me out of here. But I'm not going to say the words,
Yeah.
right? And again, 8 years later, watching hundreds and hundreds of these guys go through the process and counseling hundreds and hundreds of guys that were trying to quit, tell me why they wanted to quit. I finally saw how the inner workings worked, and I realized, okay, so that's kind of what happened to me. I ended up being one of the people that heard the voices in his head and decided, the hell with that. I'm just going to, focus on my feet, put one foot in front of the other, and hang around with guys that are having a good time and laughing, and stay away from the sad sacks, and see how long I can keep doing that. And 6 months later, I looked up and there were only 13 originals out of the original 126 guys. So
Wow.
it worked for me. I
Too
mean
stubborn to quit.
yeah, that I think that's probably what most guys would say. That if your frame of reference is a 17 or 18 or 19-year-old, you don't understand life. You have nothing to compare it to. You've never been
Mm-hmm.
through something so arduous. And I think it comes down to kind of what happens in the teams later. You're looking around, you say, I want these people to respect me, at least at the minimum level of I'm not going to quit.
Yeah.
And I passed out right after a timed run one time, and there were other guys that did the same thing, and you had choice at that point. Get up and either finish the run or get up and do the run over again because you failed the time, or no mas, walk away.
Yeah. Yeah. That's phenomenal. That when you describe that, and in some of my conversations with others, you won the game mentally. Physically, it was just lasting long enough, but mentally, you had to win, right?
It was everything about mentally. And
Yeah.
again, I mean, I think by the time you got halfway through Hell Week, you realized it was even as a 17-year-old, 18-year-old, you realized it was a mental thing because there were so many incredible physical specimens in my class.
Yeah.
There were people that were just incredible college athletes, all kinds. You saw them, you just looked at them, they looked like Tarzan,
Yeah.
and they came and they could run and they could swim and everything, and then they wouldn't be there all of a sudden. You're like, what the hell happened to Bob? Well, Bob couldn't handle it. It wasn't because
DOR.
he couldn't handle it physically. It's because he couldn't handle his brain dealing with the fatigue
Mm,
and the idea that the next day was going to just be one more day of fatigue. And they talked themselves out of it eventually. That's the voices
yeah.
in your head thing. And so when when you come back as an instructor and you watch that, you have been a SEAL and you realize it's all in your head. And you can see in the class what the breakout is. And what you're looking for is you're looking for the little guys and the quiet guys that have a little bit of fire in their eyes. And we used to say, okay, who do you think is going to make it to the end of Hell Week and not? There's 130 people there. And
Yeah.
we'd all make our little, name bets, whatever. And we'd all be pretty close. If you've been there for a year as an instructor, you got pretty close by looking at the body language because your brain tells your body to either stand up straight or slump. You could
Right.
read the tells pretty
Yeah.
easy.
Okay. So, at some point, you went through the teams for a while. You went through some combat, and then you decided OCS. I'm going to go be an officer.
Well, I did the combat was after becoming an officer.
Okay.
So I got my undergraduate in business. I took me a long time. It took me like 5, 6 years. Some of it when I was at SEAL Team 2, and I finished up the last 2 years when I was in Coronado as an instructor. You get selected for Officers Canada School. There's a panel process and all that. You make it
Yeah.
harder for an enlisted to become an officer than an officer coming right or a guy coming right out of a college class.
Yeah. So they still call them Mustangs in the Navy, right?
Yes.
Is that true
Yes.
also in the SEALs?
Yeah, pretty much. I know the Marine Corps says the same thing. I'm not sure if the Army does, but it's kind of
Green to gold in the Army.
okay. Green to gold.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what some people would say. But usually, if you run into an enlisted guy and they find out you were an enlisted guy, they just say you converted to the cake eater. You became a cake eater. So, and I was a chief petty officer up for senior chief, so I took more heat later on from the other chief petty officers when I came back as an ensign. So I go to OCS, I come back, and you're supposed to go to the opposite coast that you spend most of your enlisted time.
Uh-huh.
But the commanding officer of SEAL Team 4, who had been the executive officer of SEAL Team 6, was putting together, hand-picking people, and he had been the detailer in Washington, and so he knew the people up there, and he'd say, send him, and he picked every ex-enlisted officer he could find
Yeah.
and rerouted them to SEAL Team 4 because he figured, okay, think about it. Marty Strong shows up as an ensign, but he's got 10 years of training and leadership and everything in SEAL teams,
Yeah.
right? And if you get 10 guys like that and you have 5 regular officers, that's 100 years in those 10
You
ex-enlisted
just
guys
won the
worth of
culture
experience.
battle too.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so he stacked the deck, and me not knowing how the mix was in a regular team, I didn't really get it for a long time, but it was cool because we all got along. We all had kind of a shorthand way of thinking through things. We were all problem solvers. We didn't have to learn how to lead. And we also, were expected, and we did take a lot of the other officers under our wing. And even if we were the junior officer of the two, we were expected to mentor and help the senior officer who wasn't ex-enlisted because they were only 3 or 4 years into their learning curve. So I ended up, instead of going to the West Coast, because I spent all my enlisted time on the East Coast, I ended up going straight to SEAL Team 4, a stone throws away from my old alma mater, and walked in 2 days after I was an ensign, and I was off to the races. Right. Everybody in the SEAL teams want to go to the show. It's like the NFL. You don't want to play football with not wanting to go to the championship game. So everybody wants to go. Everybody wants to be on the field. You don't have to motivate anybody, which is, I explain it when people try to have me juxtaposition the leadership experience in the SEAL teams compared to the commercial world. It's completely, you can't even compare the two because they've already been pre-selected for that drive, right? Real high IQs, real high creativity levels. It's, if I described it back then, I would have said it's kind of like I'm in charge of a bunch of Napoleons. Everybody knows the tactics, everybody knows the weapons, everybody knows the technology, everybody knows what our mission set is, everybody can plan a mission, everybody can lead a mission, and oh, by the way, you're in charge as the officer of that. So my experience as an ex-enlisted helped me because I realized what enlisted guys thought of the officers, and I knew the officers that they liked and that they would follow to hell and back in my first 10 years. And I said, okay, I knew who to emulate. And the problem is you know so much that you feel like you should step in all the time because you know the answer. But that's exactly the wrong thing to do. The right thing to do is to kind of look at the chief and look at everybody and go, how much time do you need to figure this out? And then walk out of there. And then you come back and they've got a plan or 3 plans, and and you shouldn't be. And I was never surprised that they were really good, well thought out ways to accomplish something. So right. So it's at that point you're managing and mentoring a little bit, but not much. And the only time real leadership comes in a big way is when you're in combat and the plan goes to hell in a handbasket, and you find yourself outside of the parameters of the contingencies or whatever your fallback plan B, C was, and you have to do something on the fly. You basically have to lead because now it's the thing about it's a crisis because none of the format is intact anymore, the assumptions, which that does convey to business, by the way. That is exactly how you would lead a business in a crisis. You'd bring everybody in, somebody would lead and say, okay, let's reinvent, reimagine what the hell we have to do here, who we are, and then let's execute and keep everybody communicating so we can kind of roll with the punches. And so a really good officer steps up in those moments when it's that way. And to quote one of my buddies who was a Marine before he was a SEAL and he was in the invasion of Grenada, he never liked officers. I guess it was a Marine thing. And he was talking to one of my junior officers, giving him kind of a little bit of a slap down because he didn't perform well in an exercise one night. And he stood up and he told the story. He said, "Hey, we're down in Grenada and we're all pinned down, and this armored vehicle with a machine gun is just peppering us, and every other guy is getting wounded and getting hit in the arm, the legs, whatever." And he said, "You know what? There were 21 of us, and every single one of our heads weren't looking at the enemy. We were all looking to the right, to where the lieutenant was, and I think everybody was thinking the same thing I was. Dude, this is where you make your. This is how you get paid. Make a call." Right? Because that was the moment that that kind of leadership was relevant, and that's pretty much it. Yeah, right. I mean, it describes, at least for elite units, it describes what leadership looks like and when it's called upon. Yeah, yeah, yes, it is. And unlike football, because you're not really quarterback, you're not calling all the calls, you're not directing all the plays. The plays are practiced. Everybody. I mean, you as an officer are also have to be fully qualified as a shooter operator. Obviously, guys that have 10, 15 years in have got more experience than the average officer. The mistake young officers make sometimes, they think they have to turn into Achilles really fast so that the men will look up to them. But you'll never get there because it takes too long. And you're better off just letting the machine, letting the team do what it's been prepped and trained and selected to do. And it's we used to call it flow when we would go through targets and things. You just flow. Not a lot of commands, not a lot of hand and arm signals, and it's just kind of you're reading body language like a pickup basketball with your best friends, and the officer's just kind of trailing along. He's got the big radio in case things get really bad, so we can call somebody important to slam the hell out of somebody. Yes, that's exactly right. I mean, I had radios all over I had like four mounted with tie ties on a piece of thin plywood in the rear of my body armor instead of the actual body armor being inserted in the pocket. I had this little comms thing, and I had toggle switch and headsets, and yeah, I was just like a walking telephone pole, and not exactly the way I thought I would be running around in combat. I always saw myself more like a ninja. This is before both of those. This I was in the invasion of Panama, and I did some other things that were not related to major wars. That some of it's out there, some of it isn't. And then later, I ended up in Iraq working for the State Department, doing some things in Baghdad, which thank you. Good question. I think I don't believe that when you've accomplished something that that's an end point. I believe, and I talk to veterans that are getting out, and I said, I'll say something like, if you were talking to somebody and they were 36 years old and they were lamenting the fact that they were no longer the star quarterback in high school, or they didn't, weren't winning any more swimming medals, would you think that's a sane commentary? And if not, why? And what it means is, don't rest on your laurels and don't let your laurels basically define you. What you've done, you've done. And I have a presentation with veterans I call Thank You for Your Service, but it's kind of a snarky, scared straight conversation because it's like, who cares? That's the second line. Thank you for your service. Who cares? Everybody else can care, but you as a service member, what you need to do is figure out how to take the next steps out of uniform. And part of that is say, wow, look at all the stuff I did. Look at all the medals I have. Look at all this stuff. That's great. Put it where you want to put it so the family can see it and everything. Roll your sleeves up, become an apprentice to whatever it is you want to do. And remember, that's how you started in whatever you were doing in the military. You started out as a know-nothing, dumb person, dumb kid who had everybody mentoring and training them and everything. And how long did it take for you to become sufficiently capable? And then how long did it take for you to become a master? And at what point, timeline wise, were you an actual leader of masters? And when you put that kind of in their head, they go, wow, you're right. I mean, I wasn't a fighter pilot, until 4.5 years or 5 years later, and I wasn't a squadron commander until 13 years after I started. So why should I expect that I'm going to step out and run a company or, buy a restaurant and do really well with that? I mean, if I've never done it before. So I think you just have to say, every book I've written, I'm done with the book, but I'm already starting another book, and I'm really gratified that people like the book, especially the novels, because they've been around longer. But then I'm like, okay, but I got to do something new. I got to do something that's challenging. I've done that. Right? It's almost like why mountain climbers keep trying to find a bigger mountain. They can't get it out of their system, and they're not just going to stop, and they're not going to go find a smaller mountain. So that I think describes me. And then the third book, my third business book, be different. I talk a lot about how you have to prevent yourself from taking counsel of all these it's baggage. It's all these kind of chains that society and institutions put on you about being compliant and obedient to other people's expectations, or like linear success. And that's not the way it works. You start at a low point, you achieve a high point, and if you move to a different industry or a different profession, boom, you're back down to the low point. Now, if you learn things in the first journey, you surely are going to be able to apply them later. I mean, you might be a much better leader once you learn how to bake the bread, but you got to learn how to bake the bread. Pretty close. It's how Navy SEALs and entrepreneurs bend, break, or ignore the rules to get results. Yeah. Well, it's a normal human character trait to stabilize and make safe your immediate surroundings, around your family, around your town, around your business. It's you're digging in. Especially if you're doing really well and you achieve a certain point, your instincts are to throw up the walls, get the sandbags in place, and because somebody's going to take it, or it's going to erode or fly, blow away in the wind, kind of thing. So there's a yearning for stability. The problem is, if you're successful, you've changed yourself probably, maybe radically, and evolved. There's no stability there. You're a different person. So you've been a disruptor of your own life, your own knowledge, your own capabilities. if you create a business that made an impact and became really successful, you've probably disrupted a bunch of other things. And so up to that point, you've basically been a little bit of a rebel against compliance and obedience to formats and structures, right? And then you get there and you go, fill the sandbags, because you start become one of them. You start saying, this is how IBM became IBM. They realize they had achieved something. They're where they think they want to be, and all these other big companies like that, and they dig in. They dig in to stay. They don't dig in to prepare for the next hill. They dig in to stay. And it only takes, a couple of years before the whole culture of the company is all about risk mitigation, digging in, not taking chances. They'll say something like rapid prototyping, but they don't really rapid prototype. They'll say experimentation, but they don't really experiment. I mean, they're pretty much resting on their laurels, right? And that's when somebody comes along, like they were in the early days, and eats their lunch and rocks their boat because they weren't paying attention and they didn't realize change was in the wind. Yeah. Mostly since the 1950s, when before that, the United States and most countries, a lot of countries in the world are still very entrepreneurial. There's lots and lots of family businesses, and they become a lifestyle business. They have enough revenue to put kids through school or whatever, take care of the founder, grandparents, et cetera, pass the wealth down. Lots of generational businesses, right? And that's how the United States was. And then we went, full scale industrialization on everything during World War II. And the world needed everything because the whole world was bombed flat, except for us, pretty much. So we became this massive producer. We took the industrial age and then maximized it in the war making of war materials, and then commercial industry in the 50s copied this ability to scale and mass produce, and they just converted it to washers and dryers and vacuum cleaners and things like that. And the world wanted it. The world was ready to buy it, and that allowed that ability, kind of all supply side on the United States' side and all demand side everywhere else, caused these companies to get massive. There weren't a lot of really massive companies in the United States before World War II. There was U.S. Steel and things like that, but for the most part, everybody, it was like every village kind of a thing had its own little shoe shop and its own little whatever. New York was that way. Up until COVID, it was still kind of that way. You walk up and down streets in Manhattan, there's family businesses, whether it's shirts, hats, a restaurant, dry cleaners, every single storefront you see. That was America. So we knew it. I think we lost it a little bit, and I think we started to recover it probably in the 80s and 90s. But things are really expensive, and we're very litigious as a society. So, and a lot of regulatory constraints. So that's choked off a lot of that entrepreneurial spirit. That's exactly right. So I wrote the book because I'm on the board of Best Robotics, which is a nonprofit that helps kids 6th through 12th grade learn about technology. And they have these competitions all over the United States all through the year. Been around since, let's see, 32 years now, founded by two Texas Instrument engineers. They don't know the rules. These kids didn't go through engineering school. They aren't advanced mathematicians. They basically think up the concept, build the robot, test it, experiment until they run out of the 8 weeks of prep. Then they go into the competition. And they're allowed to rapidly prototype and fix these robots in between the rounds of competition. And they have Dremel tools and all kinds of raw materials, PVC pipe, and they sit there, and as a team, they extend the arm, they put 2 more hooks on it, they throw a magnet lift on it, whatever it is they need, because these are functional robots. They're not fighting each other. They're going out and they're doing tasks and getting scored that way. So I'm watching this thing, and I asked one of the engineers, I said, so this is the very first time I watched it. I said, where are these guys learning all this? I thought none of this was being taught. Well, it's not being taught. They're coming up with it on their own. I said, is this the way you would approach this thing? Well, no. Okay, so you wouldn't approach it this way because you've been taught how to do it. And there's one way to do it, right? And it reminded me of somebody telling me that if you teach your kid to get the right answer in a division problem using a technique that's different than the school teaches, they're going to get an F, even though the answer is the right answer, because they're teaching one way to get that division problem completed. And I said, that's kind of the thing I was hearing. The kids didn't know they were breaking rules, didn't know they were bending rules, didn't know they were ignoring rules because they didn't know any rules yet. And all they had was this kind of free flow kind of transformation, this experiential transformation in a belief system that you could think up, dream up things, and then let's go out and just try to figure it out. Let's just see if it happens. That's why the younger Americans, I think, are doing better as entrepreneurs. They're not going to the well of business schools or anyplace else and asking for permission to learn at the feet of the wise the wise men and women that have all the degrees and everything, that have all the experience in the big companies. They're talking to each other through social media. They're picking stuff up fast and they're slapping stuff together. And if it doesn't work, they go back out to social media and they're collaborating with people around the world just because they want to try to make something happen, just fix something, try something, build something. I mean, they're doing all kinds of different funding, online crowdfunding and everything. I mean, who needs a bank? So what they're doing is they're basically flying underneath the radar of the institutional way to do it. And because of that, they're going to create this whole new world. Yeah. Yeah. I think AI is going to, I think you're going to have the same strata. You're going to have kind of the institutions and their thoughts about AI. So it's going to make government more efficient. It's going to make the military more lethal. It's going to manage complex supply chains in a better fashion. I mean, that's what they're thinking. Everybody below that is thinking it's going to make games better. It's going to give me access to something I couldn't get before. It's going to be somebody that I can have a conversation with and push ideas against and have them slap them down or tell me where I'm wrong and point to things like a mentor. If you think about the way the iPhone started, Steve Jobs didn't hold up, his pack of cigarettes and go, I want you to create a phone that looks like this size. He said, I want a computer that can communicate. He didn't say, hey, let's have a bunch of apps on it that people individually create. That came later when the world decided how they wanted to use that phone, right? Because we were all running around carrying cameras and nobody knew what apps stood for. Right, which didn't take pictures either. But but somebody so this became a platform, and I think AI is going to become a platform. And the point of that comparison is we don't know how it's going to be adapted to regular life. It's not knowable right now because the lower strata is going to come up with something. And it may be as dynamic and as life changing for everybody as the camera was, where now we all just I mean, most people don't even own a camera. I'm old school. I've got one camera, and it's funny. We find old pictures, especially my old SEAL pictures from Polaroids and from little Instamatics and and I was a photographer in the teams as a enlisted guy, so pushing film and doing all the f-stop stuff and everything. Don't need any of it, right? It's like horse and buggy stuff gone. That's what AI I think is going to do. We just don't know yet exactly how it's going to hit society or business or our daily lives. No, no, and I think it's there. AI aside, there's other technologies that aren't being used. That you have the ability now, like if you had a Manhattan Project for optimizing health, from the standpoint of early determination of all risk factors through blood, DNA, whatever, rolling into an immediate full body analysis, not what's paid for by insurance, but a 48 or 50 something panel blood test that tells you a whole lot of other things. And if you could do all of that laying on a bed that was pulling the information out of you and putting it all together and correlating it and looking for all the cross references, that technology has been around for probably 20 years. Insurance companies won't pay for it. If you go into the post-acute world in assisted living and things like that, there are wearable technologies, just like Fitbit watches and things like that, that have accelerometers on them. So if you fell, which is a big thing for an older person, if you fell, it immediately alerts because the accelerometer passes a certain minimum. You can have space-related sensors that you walk around, you've got something on. You can also tell whether something moved quickly, like something with a heartbeat changed, and you can combine the two of them. So you could actually take care of human beings better, and say in the post-acute facilities with technology that's been around. Right, but the technology for that's been around for 10, 15 years. It's not deployed because it's expensive. It's not deployed because you can't pay for anything outside of Medicare or Medicaid. So if it doesn't get paid for, and that 48, 50 panel blood test, I've taken what I call an astronaut physical a couple of times and lectured by the doctors on why that's different than the 14 panel that insurance companies will pay for, and what else they can pick up about you. And I'm like, well, why don't they just pay for the 48? Because most of it's preventative knowledge that you get from the full spread. So I don't think AI is going to go in there. It sounds good. It fits. If you're a Star Trek guy, it's original Star Trek, taking laying somebody on a bed and running a tricorder or whatever over the top of their body and pull that stuff's all fully capable now. But I think it would take something like the United States government and a Manhattan Project to say, we're going to do all this and then we're going to make it scale it to a point that it's affordable and everybody could actually adopt it instead of just people with wealth. Yeah, I did one in 2017. It wasn't the blood panel that caught it. It was a CT scan with contrast, which was not a standard physical. That would be a special. They found something, so now we got to get permission to do that. And they found my kidney cancer at a state that it was. The quote was, "You wouldn't have any symptoms to complain about to your doctor for 2.5 years." It was just started. It was a tumor that was probably the size of an M&M at the very bottom of my right kidney. And within a week, I had the Da Vinci thing with the robotic surgery done, gone. So that's what I mean by early detection. There's lots of other things besides blood that would be early detection, and AI has already proven that it can outperform reading X-rays and MRIs and other things at a much, much higher level of accuracy than a human being. But guess what? There's a human being there. like unmanned aircraft in the military. Who's in charge? Who's in charge of the pilot programs in the aircraft? Pilots. Yeah. Yeah, you can't. The pilots will never say, "Let's get rid of all the pilots," and the doctors will never say, "Let's get rid of all the doctors." Um, Humility, because the day I took that astronaut physical that caught the kidney cancer, I was training Muay Thai for 2.5 years prior to that. I was like I was 50, something like 52. I was in fantastic shape. I mean, I was in like UFC, ripped. I crushed the whole physical. I did the cardiological test where I was up on the treadmill and had all that stuff on me and everything, and my heart was blown up on this big screen, and they had this little thing. They said, "Okay, you've got the heart of a 25-year-old college athlete," and and it was in the car ride from that physical back to my house when I got the call. Hey, can you come back in tomorrow morning around 7? Yeah. So I went from like dun da 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 bam down to yeah, that's the way it works, guy. It doesn't matter how much you can lift or how fast you can run or any of this other stuff. And it didn't scare me. It just I think it really humbled me. It made me think, like everybody says, how much time do you have? And and as you know, my son died. He died in a car crash when he was 22. And that's another thing, how many people have lost, whether it's disease or whether it's an accident like that, the abruptness, and you start looking at people and say, how much time have I spent telling somebody I loved them? Or how much time have I spent doing this for somebody else? And if you've been pushing only for your own agenda, even if it's a personal agenda and you're not hurting anybody, you start putting things in a different perspective. I didn't go way overboard. I mean, I wasn't a bad person as it was, but it made me think about all those things. And between that and my son's passing, I don't ever take any day for granted. Um, well, my son died when he was 22, and I have friends who had lost children. I think when you lose a child, there's a different reaction than when you lose an adult child or an adult, um, yeah, adult child, I guess. And in the case of my son, he went to Iraq. He was in the Air Force, and he survived a tour in Iraq, had come back and re-up for another tour. Everybody in my family was against him joining the military because they all knew about me. So they didn't want him taking chances. And if kind of a roll of dice from the family side, if I made it through, then let's just stop there. Um, Furious with him that he volunteered for Iraq. And I told everybody the same thing, except this is kind of sad now. I said, he has more there's more probability he'll die in a car accident in the United States than he will die on a battlefield in Iraq. Because you don't understand, he's going to be around guys that are covering for him, looking out for him all the time. He's going to be surrounded by fences. He's going to be, I mean, it's a secure thing, right? Whereas every time you get in your car and go down to the grocery store to get something to eat, you never know when some wild, crazy person, drunk or just isn't paying attention, is going to take you out. And 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 that's how he ended up passing. Right, he ended up passing in an ice storm in the middle of the week in the morning. 18 other people died in the same ice storm. I doubt they expected that to happen. So I think the aftermath for me was, as much as I said what I said about Iraq, I kind of prepared myself that something could happen to him. Maybe less than being killed, but because a lot of the guys, when I was over there, we were getting shot at and rocketed and mortared all the time. So the likelihood it could happen was pretty high, and I knew that. So I was a little shocked that my prophecy came true, and he actually died a different way. And as I think with most people that are parents and lose somebody, one of the two usually picks up the leadership role, because usually one of the two can't deal with it or has a hard time dealing with it. And when you pick up that leadership role, you kind of go in automatic, whether it's automatic dad, automatic mom, and you start executing. You start taking care of what has to be taken care of. And everybody looks at you and you look calm and you look like you're the rock and you know all this stuff, and you aren't, but that's how you're coping. You're coping by stepping up and leading through the crisis, the family crisis. And then later on, kind of like PTSD, the person that didn't take on that role has been grieving appropriately, right? Is expending all that kind of energy and has kind of come to a different place. And the person that was playing super dad or super mom a year later suddenly has PTSD and sees a movie and there's a car crash and they suddenly burst out in tears because they haven't dealt with it yet. They haven't let it out. And I think I was more like that guy. I mean, I was the guy who jumped in and did all those things. And so if anybody's listening to this and they've been through that, then they know that. And you need to understand that if it happens to you and you were the leader personality, it doesn't mean it's over. It means you just delayed it. And talking to other people that have lost kids really helps, because they'll tell you stuff like I'm telling you now. A SEAL buddy of mine lost his son, who actually went to SEAL training, got hurt, went back out into the fleet and got set up for another set of orders to BUD/S. He was driving down the road with his girlfriend. There was a car broken down, broad daylight. They pulled over. He got out. He walked up, see if the woman was all right. Opened the door, and a car hit him and killed him, screaming down the highway. Right, star athlete in high school, super smart guy, and his dad's a SEAL who I put through BUD/S years ago. And he talked to a couple people, and they said, "Well, you know, Marty lost his son." So he called me up out of nowhere. We didn't work together in the teams, but this is the kind of stuff I was trying to share with him. And I think in his case, it might have been the wife was the super parent through the event, and he was the one who was more shook up. But he was looking for down the road how to deal with it. And I said, you just got to celebrate their life and stop thinking about the death. So we have a birthday party on the anniversary of his birthday, just 22nd of February. And last time he was at our house, he left a bottle of flavored cheap vodka, a fifth of really bad cheap strawberry flavored vodka. So we get a little cupcake or a really small cake, put a candle in it. We write a message to him inside of a birthday card. We put 3 bottles. My wife will drink Jameson's, I'll drink tequila, and we'll put 2 shot glasses with our drinks in there. And we'll take a picture of it. And my kids, wherever they are in the United States, are doing the same thing. And then we all swap the pictures. And then me and my wife take the card out to the fire pit, and we set it on fire so the message goes to Valhalla, and we do the shot, and that's it. And we do that every year. Yeah, yeah. And if there's other kids in the family or other people, you know, don't expend yourself in despair and in depression. Other people need you too. So Being Able was the first book. It is about leadership in crisis and chaos. I use business events, internal and external business events, as kind of the framework, because that's what most people are going to go through. I'm not using combat, but what you learn in combat, and what especially elite units, because they have so much more time, so much more money, and the caliber of the people they have, you basically have ways to mitigate the crisis way before a crisis ever happens. So when I say mitigate, that's on the deal with the downside part of the crisis. But you also have to train and prepare to take advantage of the crisis on the upside. So in business, that's an easier thing to identify. COVID in 2020. Okay. Look at the companies that benefited from COVID. I'd never even heard of Zoom really before COVID. And other companies stepped up, and well, some companies saw it for what it was to the way their business model was, devastating, disrupting, but maybe devastating. Others said, holy crap, this is the time to do what we do in a big way. And that's been the case. There's business books that document case studies, go back to the original stock market crash and depression. How many new businesses, how many new industries were created in the 5-6 years after that, because the normal had been destroyed and fractured, and that let everybody, like we were talking about before, about the two different stratas of institutional lock-in, this is the way it's going to be, and then the undercurrent of young entrepreneurial thinking. It happened after World War II, and it actually happened after World War I also. It happened after World War I, happened after the stock market crash of 29. And it happened after the 87 stock market crash, and it happened after the 2008 mortgage related financial crisis. And the reason that happens is because what you're looking at, the reality you're looking at, is somebody's idea of stability. They're trying to hold together. A couple other reasons too. If I can keep it the way it is, like say Kodak, then everybody has to use a camera with film, right? And then all of a sudden an event happens and everything gets suspicious. Everything's kind of flaky and falling apart. And all of a sudden there's all this opportunity for people that are willing to look for the opportunity in the moment. So in Be Nimble, I talk about all the preparative stuff. So in the SEAL teams, everybody gets trained as a leader. In the SEAL team, everybody gets trained as a trauma medic. Now, they don't go to the big fancy school and spend the time that our medics do, which are called corpsmen, but everybody's trained in basically how to stabilize somebody for medevac. Everybody. And every time in training or in combat I ever saw anybody shot, lose a limb or something, the last person to get to them, if they could get to them because of the scrum over the top of them, was the medical professional. Because instantly the guy next to him is putting a tourniquet on, putting an IV in, boom, 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 boom. Somebody else is jumping up and calling for a medevac. And the people in charge, or the medic in charge, they're kind of standing there, but that's what's supposed to happen. Because you've trained for a crisis, and it's less of a crisis if you've got 16 guys and 15 other guys can do what the one specialist can do. And you train that way, right? The redundancy helps to deal with the moment the crisis happens. The leadership's the same way. They kill the leaders in exercises, and then the rest of the guys have to figure out how to complete the mission. So that's, I don't know if it's a crisis if the leader gets killed or debilitated, but they pretend it's a crisis. So the enlisted guys can be in charge. That's what Be Nimble basically focuses on, all the preparatory things you can do to mitigate the bad side, but also how do you keep your ears and eyes open for that window of opportunity that's also associated with crisis. Think of it like in football, broken field running. I mean, it's hard to get through the line if you try to punch through the line, right? But if everybody's screwed up because of a bad, goofy play, and most plays are designed to try to misdirect and keep people all mixed up, and then somebody goes out there, and if they're talented, they can run through the broken field and dodge everybody. And it's broken field thinking. You're basically it, and for a period of time during the crisis, and COVID was a longer crisis than normal. Nobody's gonna say anything to you if you do something different or odd or weird or raise your hand and ask a question because everything's in chaos and everything's unstable. But what's going to happen as quick as everybody starts to get their heads together, they're going to try to either stabilize back to the old paradigm or they're going to try to seize whatever the drift and momentum seems to be, grab that, and then try to lock down that paradigm. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That's why people write books too. It's to open your mind to tell you it's okay to think this way. My second book, Be Visionary, is about it's okay to think big picture. It's okay to look at the horizon and dream. It's not a silly thing that only children do. And then it tells you how to take it and turn it into an actionable plan. But it leads with the dreaming part first, because that's the part that's missing in most organizations. Being able is about don't freak out every time there's a crisis. You can prepare everybody for it and then start looking for the opportunities that are there. And then be different is you can be creative and you can be innovative and you can have an imagination at any age as long as you don't have a medical impairment and you've just been told you can't. So, yeah. Well, let's put it this way, to build leadership. Because I think most people think if you say leader, it's got to be somebody in an org chart. I don't think that in that restricted way. I think anybody can be a leader of their own life. I think anybody obviously can be a leader of a family. The business connotation is where you can find a lot of examples and everything, but even and be different, especially because most people that have read that book said it's not just about business people, it's about anybody, everybody, because it's about using your brain in a more effective manner in the way it was designed to be used. So I think if you think the way, at least in my three books, if you think the way I lay it out, if you think big thoughts and you think creative thoughts and you plan for contingencies and crisis, you are leading. You are leading your world. You're leading your experience. So you go to martystrong.com. It's as simple as that. So all my speaking programs, all my books can be found there, and my novels are all written under M.L. Strong, and my business books are under Marty Strong. But easiest way is just go to martystrong.com. Well, if it had been Mighty instead of Marty, it would probably work. But no, it was a pain in the butt when I was a bud student, and as a as an instructor, if you have a name, I mean, if you have a name like last name like Whiplash or Diver, or you are going to be doing whatever that name has is associated with it. So I probably was ordered to try to lift 5 or 6 trucks a week because I was Marty Strong. So hey, you're so strong. I was go lift that truck up. The instructors were messing with me all the time. How many people can you lift? Let's see if you can lift these 3 guys. Let's see if you can lift this log all by yourself. Yeah, it wasn't. Smith was good. Smith would have been a good name. Well, you don't get to pick your own, right? So, at SEAL Team 4, I was Thunder 1 and in combat. And then when I was in Baghdad, I had two. It was Pliskin and Yoda. Yeah, and I thought Pliskin was cool. I came in and organized a bunch of stuff for the embassy, a lot of defensive stuff, and in all night sessions, like 18-hour sessions with borrowed whiteboards and rooms full of really smart combat guys, and got it all organized and got it all set up and everything. And one of the guys said it's like Eric sent Snake Plissken to Baghdad, and that's how I got Pliskin. And I love Snake Plissken, so I thought that was the coolest. Yeah, that's a good one. That's a good one. We used to have daily. We used to change the call signs a lot when I was in SEAL Team 4. And if you walked up to the comms guy and suggested that you wanted to have a cool call sign, you were screwed forever. You got Dumbo or Yahtzee, or I mean, you got. Well, how come he's Thunder One? Because he's Thunder One. You don't get to be Thunder One. You get to be Yahtzee. A guy named Duke Leonard, uh, ex-enlisted SEAL. Uh, I think he had one, maybe two tours in Vietnam, and he got the Silver Star in the invasion of Grenada. He led the mission to protect Governor Schoons and his family at the Schoons Mansion, and he was a mentor when I became an officer. He's kind of a master planner. His nickname was the Wizard, and he basically, without directly teaching me like a lecturer, I I copied and emulated every single solitary thing I could off that guy, and it made me it made me a polished officer really early in my career, and I carried that on. His demeanor when things were going wrong, all that stuff, it really helped.
When you get an opportunity, subscribe or follow wherever you get your podcast.